The topic of my talk is collaboration, how we work together. But another subtitle would be, what can we learn from the bees, which you already see here hinted at in the opening slide. And we will hear about the bees much more and the difference I make between the wisdom of the swarm and the stupidity of the crowd. In my work, I look at social networks. We have seen many very nice social network pictures this morning. You will see some more. But I'm trying to use them to make predictions for the future, which of course, as we all know, never work. Like the predictions about Germany against Brazil, and that Germany had 0 chance of winning the game, a very low chance of winning the game, and then we know it turned out very differently. Anyway, so I would like to cover those 5 topics. First, I would like to introduce the overall framework of creative swarms. In that sense, I make somewhat a difference between swarm creativity and swarm intelligence. And then I would like to put that framework, and swarm creativity describes how those coins or collaborative innovation networks operate to practical use in what I call cool hunting, hunting for cool trends by finding the trendsetters and finding them on Twitter, on Wikipedia, on Facebook, finding them on the organizational level, and I have been studying email networks for the last 12 years, and also finding them face-to-face, working with what Sandy Pendleton at the Media Lab calls sociometric badges. Those are things that people wear around their necks and that measure whether we look into each other's eyes and whether I'm letting you speak or not. And I'm also applying that not just for cool hunting, but also what I call cool farming. You can already tell I like buzzwords. And I was a professional consultant for a couple of years, where you get in the habit of inventing buzzwords, and it's very hard to get rid of that habit. A, and B, it helps sell the books. And so swarm creativity, cool hunting, and cool farming are very catchy titles, and you can easily Google them, and they will end up on the Amazon page, and if you click on buy, I won't mind. The practical application of cool farming then is measuring how creative teams interact, show it to them, and tell them what they could do better. And we have developed a dashboard with a tool which has also been developed at our group called Condor, that takes those social network signals, those what Sandy Pendleton calls the honest signals, those interaction signals that we cannot hide, that will give away whether I like somebody or not, and distill it down to 6 simple variables, which you see shown here: central leaders, rotating leaders, balanced contribution, rapid response, honest sentiment, and innovative language. And our Condor tool takes email, Twitter, Wikipedia, and gives you those numbers and tells you what you can do better. And in the end, I just would like to show one little side application. I have been very interested into studying Wikipedia for a long time, and one of the most recent developments is something called Wiki History, which allows you to construct a history book from Ötzi, who seems to be the oldest person in Wikipedia, 3,000 years BC, down to, we stop at 1900 because then it gets too biased, and you can basically look who the most important people are right now only from the perspective of English culture or the Western world, because we take English Wikipedia right now, we are replicating it with Chinese and Arabic. We are not replicating it with the German Wikipedia, although it's the 2nd largest, and as you might be able to figure out from my accent, would be my native language, coming from Switzerland originally, not Germany, but the accents still are somewhat similar. And so comparing the Chinese worldview and the Arabic worldview, we think would be quite interesting. So back now to the creative swarms and how we can put them to productive use. the one thing that we are trying to do is predicting the future, or to put it in more provocative words, learning from the past to optimize the future. And people have been trying to predict the future for a very long time. They have been slaughtering chickens and reading chicken intestines and tried to predict what's going to happen there. Or they looked at the stars, and that would predict the future. And this is actually quite representative for the approach that we are still using today, because the chicken intestines, the chicken basically is the mirror into my inner self, and that would correspond to those sociometric badges. And the stars, that's the globe, that's everything, that's all of us, that's the world, that's the galaxy, that's Twitter. And what can we learn from Twitter? So today, we look at social networks and those patterns. And this is a screenshot from our tool Condor that are just retweet network for Barack Obama, or for people tweeting about Planet of the Apes or whatever movie you want, will predict how much money the movie will make at the box office. But I will come to that. And on the other hand, we can have those sociometric badges. Here you see Javier wearing one of them, and they will show how I'm doing and how everybody in my little group is doing. That would correspond to the chicken. We have studied a lot of small groups. We did it with marketing teams in banks, with software developers at former highly successful unnamed Nordic mobile phone company. We also did it with jazz musicians, because I'm very interested into flow and how we can get into this most productive of mind states. And jazz musicians, for me, are representative of that category. To just resume it in one sentence, what all of this does, it helps making the invisible hand visible. And that means that we can never predict an earthquake. We can only predict, of course, whether you think that there will be an earthquake. So that's the basic idea. And now to the difference between the crowds and the swarms. And humans can be unbelievably stupid, like the soccer hooligans after a game, when they just start beating each other up. Like the Brazilians, when they were really unhappy a couple of days ago, they started burning cars and beating each other. On the other hand, they can also be very smart, like those kids, using the one laptop per child and learning from each other. And the question is, why? What's the difference? And I have some very simple frameworks. And for me, for the crowds, it's all about money, power, and glory. And here you see a group of people chasing money, which was thrown out of the window, and the only thing they do, they will be beating each other, pushing each other away to get as much money as possible. Swarms, that's the difference. Intrinsic motivation compared to extrinsic motivation, and it's all about love. Plus a little bit of money, power, and glory, because we are just humans, so that counts too. But the main motivation, and this group here, that's face transplant surgeons in a big Boston hospital doing one of the first face transplants. They are certainly want to be paid, and they would like to be famous among their own circles, but the main reason why they're doing it is to get that woman a new face. And so this intrinsic motivation, that's for me the main difference. And I'm trying to understand how people collaborate and how we can make those intrinsically motivated teams more creative, even more creative. And this is described in great detail in the book here. But just to give you an example, and I think for a conference about web science, that will be a very fitting example. I don't even have to ask who that person is, because normally nobody knows. But here I think it's pretty obvious. Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the World Wide Web. I met him the first time in 1991. I was a postdoc at MIT in ANA, the Advanced Networking Architecture group of David Clark. and working on hypertext, and had a paper accepted at the ASM Hypertext Conference in San Antonio. I was carrying my big and clunky Macintosh down to San Antonio and was demoing my system there. And then Tim came to my desk. And at that time, of course, nobody knew. Sir Tim, I should say. I just learned yesterday that's the correct way of naming him. Although at that time he wasn't Sir Tim. And he told me that his paper had been turned down, but he had come there anyway, together with Robert Caillot, his buddy from CERN, and he had carried a large pile of his papers, which had been turned down. I was fortunate, I was a postdoc as part of the group, so my paper had been accepted, but his not. And he had also one-page flyers, and he had asked me whether he could put them up on my desk. The reason being that it was a flat surface, so you could put up the flyers easily there, but another one, he had figured out very quickly that I was Swiss, and he was at that time working in a Swiss institution, so he thought one Swiss person would help another Swiss person, which of course I was very happy to do. And so, highly intrinsically motivated with the paper turned down, he was so much excited about his idea that he just went there. And he was able to recruit a small group of people. At that conference, I still remember the Birds of a Feather session during lunch. And there was Dan Knolly from Texas. There were some other people. He also tried to recruit me, but I had better things to do, of course. I had an academic career to pursue and writing serious papers. And so I passed at that time on the opportunity. But still, he got this little group of intrinsically motivated people, and that's what I call the COIN, or Collaborative Innovation Network, to work with him on turning the vision into a real product. And one of the people which he convinced was my boss at that time, David Clark, the head of the Advanced Networking Architecture Group, who invited him to come as a visiting scientist. And I still remember Tim didn't get an office in the beginning. He was sitting in the hallway, had a very old and clunky computer, and he was sending emails, trying to recruit more people to work with him. And what already struck me then was how quickly he responded. I mean, now he's not so fast anymore, but at that time, he was really blazingly fast in answering his emails. And he was able to grow the group. And he also convinced the boss of my boss, Michael Dertouzos, the director of the Lab for Computer Science, to start a World Wide Web consortium. And for me, that's the next level. I call that the learning network, this bigger group, a few hundred people. So the COIN, that's a really small group. Everybody knows everybody. According to Robin Dunbar, an anthropologist, Dunbar's number, your family group is like at most 15, and that's, for me, sort of the ballpark figure for the COIN. And then Robin Dunbar has the bigger group, which is the tribe, which is 150 plus minus, and that would be the learning network. In this case, it was the World Wide Web Consortium, recruiting companies to give some money and start developing the web in earnest, which worked really well. And then I think we all know the rest, how it went. There was a guy named Mark Andreessen who wrote something called Mosaic, which later on became Netscape, and made the web useful for everybody. But for me, this is the blueprint. This is how collaborative innovation networks work. You have a totally dedicated, highly creative person that has a vision. They recruit a small group of friends and family of people that are similarly committed, and they turn that vision into a first prototype. The friends and family of that little group, they try it out. Some of them join the COIN, the others carry to the rest of the world, and then in the end, we get this crazy new idea to change the world. And if you look at Wikipedia, if you look at Linux, which makes another great example, they all work the same. And actually, Linux, in my view, is an even better example because Linus Torvalds, when he, in the same year, by the way, 1991, sent out this email. He said, I have here a little system. It's free for everybody. Feel free to change it, but please, if you make any changes, send them back to me to share with the rest of the world. Sharing with the rest of the world. I think that's the key. And the less money you have, the more sharing you need to be. If you are Google or Facebook, you can still afford giving things away, but you keep sort of the icing on the cake, and that will make the $35 billion that Google makes per year. If you have little money, like Wikipedia or Linux or the web, you share everything. And then you get the idea off the ground extremely well. And so this is the blueprint for me of swarm creativity, coin, learning network, interest network, and the question now is, how do we find those people? And over the last 12 years, I looked at a lot of email archives. One of the first email archives was the one of the World Wide Web Consortium. Another one was the Linux mailing list. But I also have now had the opportunity to get probably 100 or so company email archives by now. In the beginning, it took a lot of convincing that I was allowed to get those email archives. But by now, we have studied a lot of them. And what we find is that the coins set themselves apart from the rest of people working in large organizations in 3 dimensions. The first one is connectivity. And when Tim left CERN and came to MIT, he did another really unbelievably courageous thing. It's better to be a little fish in a big pond than a big fish in a little pond. So by coming to MIT and having this huge echo chamber or sounding board, he was able to get his idea out and connecting himself in the right way. And so using social network analysis, looking at connectivity, measuring centrality. Who of you knows of betweenness and degree centrality? Okay, so a few words then. Betweenness centrality measures, it's like PageRank. We were speaking of PageRank yesterday, almost the same thing. It means your network position depends on the power or the influence of your friends. Degree centrality basically just measures how many friends you have. And those are 2 very simple network metrics that you can measure to find out that Tim Berners-Lee very early on was a queen bee in the World Wide Web Consortium. So network position, that's the first thing. The next one, and again, Tim was really a role model for me. Only at that time I didn't really notice how exceptional that was by answering emails so fast. And you can think of that very easily. If I send an email to Bill Gates, who cares? If I send an email to Bill Gates and Bill Gates answers to me 30 seconds later, I must be Barack Obama or Warren Buffett or some other really important person. To put it in other words, measuring responsiveness tells you 2 things. On the one hand, if you measure Tim's responsiveness, you see whether he's a great collaborator. And if you measure the people's response to Tim's response, you will see their opinion about Tim. So the higher they think of him, the faster they will respond. And on average, and by now we do that for corporate email archives where we get 80,000 actors. That's in the language of social network analysis. All the nodes in the graph are called actors. And so there we measure how quickly they respond to each other. And that gives you a proxy. And normally the CEO is being responded to very quickly. But if you take a rank and file employee and everybody responds her or him very quickly, you can be pretty sure that this person will be promoted next year. So speed of response, that's the next metric. And the next one is a quite hard one, degree of sharing. And we also look at word usage. And this is pretty hard because companies don't like sharing content. And individuals don't like to do it neither. And so when we have mailing lists, we get content, and that's how we could develop our metric. But by now, we can also look at it in sort of an anonymous way and just measure sentiment, positivity and negativity. But it gets even more interesting when we can track spread of new ideas. And what that means, we have a base dictionary of word distribution, and in the old days, there was something called the British National Corpus, which measured word distribution in the British language based on word literature. These days, with Google Ngrams, there is no need for those sort of things anymore. You have a really standardized, much broader way of looking at word usage and distribution. And what we have done, we have built our own corpus and a machine learning system to train our tool based on tweets, on billions of tweets. And so if a group starts making up their own words, then that's a metric of innovation, A. And B, if Stefan invents new words and then everybody starts picking it up and using it, you are a highly influential person. So we can now have those three metrics. How are you connected? How quickly are you responding and others responding to you? And word usage and new ideas. How quickly are others picking them up? So this is basically how our algorithm works. And the people which are in the upper right quadrant, that's the ones we are trying to discover. Those are the Tims and Linus Torvalds and Jimmy Wales. Normally, their networks don't look like a star, but they look like this fully connected clique. I mean, this is not fully connected, but it would be quite high density, meaning out of all possible connections, almost all are really existing. And if we generalize that, this means don't be a star, but be a galaxy. And this is two real mailboxes of my students. This is always the first exercise in my class, that they have to look at their mailbox and then they will know. And the star, by the way, is a star programmer who likes to sit in his office and doesn't like to communicate so much, and that's the sort of network that you get because you communicate then one-on-one with your buddies. Whereas if you are a very extroverted person and you have your ideas and you want to carry it out to the rest, you are embedded into clouds of other people, and then you get this sort of galaxy pattern. And so don't be a star, be a galaxy. That's sort of one very easy moniker to remember. So now we know the patterns, and we can them to use for cool hunting and for cool farming, meaning trying to find those creative people and new ideas. So that's cool hunting. The tool that we have developed is Condor, which is available for free academic use. We sell it to companies. I also have a little software company on the side, and that's how we pay the salaries of the programmers. But it basically takes email. It behaves like an email client. It takes your Facebook network. Facebook would be great if you would get everybody's Facebook network, but in this age of privacy awareness, it's really hard to get everybody else's Facebook network. Twitter is great because there we have everything. So this is very useful. But it's only a small subset of society, at least in Germany or in Finland. So just out of curiosity, who is tweeting? That's a very small subset. When I ask the same question at Sloan, or I also teach at the design school, it's like Savannah, SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design is like 80%. So I'm wondering whether this is this particular group. If I ask it in Germany or in Finland, it's like 10%.
You have to use a different tense. You said who is tweeting, and they assumed you meant have this.
Oh, no, I meant who tweets. Yes, who tweets, who is registered on Twitter. Still, it's not, that's probably 50%. It's quite low for North America. If I would ask in Chile, it would be 90%. But in Germany, that culture is very different. Wikipedia is a great source. I will show you one example, perhaps if I have time, even another one, where we can find most recent news from Wikipedia. We looked at Wikipedia edits, and we found that we checked sports news and celebrity news. On average, Wikipedia is 1 to 2 hours faster than other news. And I'm wondering why that is. And I think one reason is that they don't have to verify and fact check so much. Another one is that probably there is always a Wikipedia nearby who enters those things. But I just remember the Boston Marathon bombing when I was stuck in my bedroom in Cambridge. Mainstream news was useless. It was mostly Twitter, a mix of Twitter and actually also Wikipedia. And just checking those pages and seeing what was happening. So our tool takes those things and then gives those metrics. You can just Google it and download it if you like, or I will also show you a link at the end. And so we can then look at global, at organizational and individual trends. With the badges, we are not looking at content. That was a decision that Sandy Pentland made intentionally. He didn't want to record content. He's just looking at, he looks at voice, but only for turn taking, which can then again be used for seeing who responds how quickly to whom. So the metrics that I introduced, those 6 metrics, they work for global networks, for organizational networks, and for individual networks. Now let me just show you a few very quick examples. This is a project we did a couple of years ago where we looked at communication networks of software startup CEOs in Israel and their survival. So Onit Raz, postdoc at MIT, had in 1998 for her PhD at the Technion in Haifa asked her buddies, which happened to be software startup CEOs, with whom of your 99 peers are you communicating? And then we looked 6 years later which of the companies was still around, and it turns out that the communication pattern of 1998 predicts very well which companies will still be around. Size matters. The bigger your communication network in 1998, the better. By the way, the best predictor for survival was just the willingness to answer Onit's questions. So the willingness of the CEOs to be somewhat altruistic and spend the time to talk with a graduate student in 1998, meaning thinking outside the box and doing something which is interesting but doesn't give immediate profits, was the best predictor. But the network was a good predictor too. We repeated that experiment again with Onit, with the Biotech cluster in Boston, where we asked 10% of all R&D members of 200 startups. It was the full cluster, which has at that time had 350 members. With whom are you communicating? We polled them at a random day per week and asked them to just report on a web survey with whom they had spoken of their other 349 cluster members, but also they could mention other organizations, and it turns out, as you can see here, that they speak even more. The size here measures network centrality. They speak even more with big pharma, because in Cambridge you have a lot of big pharmaceutical companies, and they speak even more with big universities like MIT, Harvard, BU, and so on. And the question now is, does this communication pattern again predict success? And the answer is yes, and location matters. This is another one of those holy grails, trying to figure out whether being close in the center of a high-tech cluster actually helps. And the answer is it doesn't matter. Or to be more precise, the sheer amount of communication depends very strongly on where you are. Yeah. The senior investigator in that project was another MIT colleague of mine named Tom Allen, who has invented something called the Allen curve, which has had a big impact for architects. It basically measures that if you are farther apart than 50 meters in an office, you could as well be on the moon. You will never talk to each other. And what we found, there is an Allen curve for companies, which is 3 miles. If companies are farther apart than 3 miles, they will not communicate. It was really an exponential drop-off. However, this doesn't matter for business success. What matters for business success is networking position. So our dependent variable here was PA, which means patent applications, which, I mean, it's as good as any. It's really hard to get good metrics. The best would be bottom line revenue, but they are startups, so they don't have to share that variable. So we had some PhD students looking up the patents of those patent applications in patent databases, and that's how we got our dependent variable. And it turns out it doesn't really matter whether you are far or close. For patent applications, it just matters whether you are central in the network or not. For the talking, it matters. If you are close, you talk more. But the difference is non-significant between being close and far. The difference is really highly significant between being in the center of the communication cluster or in the periphery. Another project was looking at box office movie success. And this is really a swarm because people are not paid to post. And that's why we can measure the between a centrality, degree centrality, how central somebody is, and weigh whatever they say on IMDb with the network position. And we also did the same with Twitter. And it turns out, and that's a project which was quite some time ago, so at that time it was Pirates of the Caribbean, it was The Departed and Snakes on a Plane, which is a really bad movie. But it was hyped up when it appeared. So if you look from the outside, they all had the same amount of buzz. But if you applied our variables, then Snakes on a Plane disappeared. And The Departed was really very high up. We also predicted who would win an Oscar based on buzz in the Oscar forum on IMDb, and that worked very well at that time for best picture and best director, and it didn't work for best actor. And when we looked at it, the reason the love life of the actors messed up our sentiment analysis system. Because we weren't able to pick up whether they were speaking about the qualities of George Clooney getting married or engaged or whatever, or his chances for getting an Oscar. But the bottom line is, using that system for box office returns, you can predict with 90% accuracy about 2 weeks in advance how much money the movie is going to make. And once we had figured that out, we tried to repeat it with stock. And well, on the one hand, it works very well for writing papers. So we were able to construct paper portfolios which had an average return of 50% per month. And so we thought, okay, now let's take $10,000 and start trading on it. And after 3 months, we had 9,500, and then we stopped. First, some software errors in the automated trading system. And then we had also chosen a niche market, alternative energy stocks, because the problem is, for IMDb, we have to swarm. If a person says, this movie is great, I'm going to see it, normally they go. If in stock, somebody says, I'm buying a certain stock, you cannot really be sure whether they are doing that or it's just trying to game the system. So it's really hard to figure out whether somebody is honest or not when there is so much money in the game. And so in that regard, this is a crowd and not a swarm. And so our idea was for the stocks to take alternative energy titles and looking at climate change and carbon trading and so on. And that worked reasonably well. But it was a very non-liquid market. And in order to make money, you have to day trade. And then we were sort of shooting ourselves in the foot because our trading started changing the prices. So after that experiment, I thought, okay, let's go back to my academic work and leave the trading to people at Wall Street. Anyway, so this is cool farming means helping people succeed, creating the next big thing, so to speak. And right now, I'm quite involved in creating medical coins. And one of our big projects is called C3N, called the Collaborative Care Network. It started with patients of inflammatory bowel disease or Crohn's disease at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, where the idea is to create coins between patients and their families, doctors and researchers. And the big idea is that they are all equal, and they are all sharing their insights and working together, and this is quite different from the old medical research system where you have the medical researcher and doctor, which is here, and the patient, which is here. And the big difference here is trying to create those innovation communities and applying those principles I have been mentioning before. We looked at the email network when this project was started. Peter Margolis, who is sort of the Tim Berners-Lee of that project, invited me to the very first meeting, and I just downloaded his mailbox. And we looked at his network, and we're trying to find the coins. And so what you see here, this is Peter Margolis and 2 of his or 3 of his closest buddies' email network. And then you see how over time that changes, and how they are doing what I call the waggle dance of bees, meaning recruiting others to help them spread out their ideas, how they rotate as leaders, and how then, just like with the World Wide Web Consortium, where we got semantic web and a lot of other new initiatives, here we got already 18 new initiatives that are all new coins around the topic of Crohn's disease. And by now, the same is applied for cystic fibrosis, for diabetes type 1. And just last year, there was a very big project. It's called the home visiting coin and infant mortality coin. And the idea is to leverage that model all across the US for mothers on welfare, more or less. The 17,000 babies which are born of mothers which are like in inner city conditions, and that have just 2 people whom they know. One is the father of the child and the other one is their own mother, and trying to help them create those coins and weave a much better network. So that's one of the main applications for cool farming. Another one, which is quite a commercial one, is looking at customer satisfaction through the email boxes of account managers. We have worked with a very big Indian outsourcing company that so far has been using something called NPS, Net Promoter Score, to measure customer satisfaction. It basically means you ask your customer, how likely are you to recommend me? And if I'm recommended, then my customer is a promoter. And if the other person says never, they're called a detractor. And this is the process how a lot of those businesses measure satisfaction. And that gives us a great dependent variable. And then we compare that with the mailbox of the people inside the company. And what we find again is that those 6 variables that I introduced to you, that I will show to you very quickly, that they hold. That if we measure centrality, speed of response, and so on, of the account managers, that will tell us how happy the customer is. Just same thing as we can do with patients, or even with individual people wearing the sociometric badges. And if you wear those badges, I can, on the one hand, and I think that has been now shown a couple of times, predict your personality characteristics using the FFI test. So if you are familiar with it, neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeability, conscientiousness, those are the 5 things that are being measured. And if you wear those badges, you don't have to take the test anymore, because the correlations are pretty strong. And once I got those correlations from the batches, I repeated it with the email, and it works too. The way how you email will also tell you your big 5 characteristics. But we also looked at what makes software developer teams and what makes jazz musicians work together better. And again, we can, for example, measure group flow. It seems that the mirror neurons, the more in a group you mirror each other, the more you are in flow. How did we know that for the jazz musicians? With the batches, they have the microphone built in. So our dependent variable was just the strength of the applause of the audience. So we could just use the same tools that we are measuring for interpersonal interaction to also measure the dependent variable. Okay, so that's a quick run-through of very few of our experiments. Now, this describes how we apply it, how we measure those honest signals that I was mentioning, and this is the dashboard from our Condor tool, where you can just load mailboxes, and you can either just take your own mailbox and look at yourself, or you can take a 50,000 people company, and then you need MapReduce and cloud in order to manage the data, because you get terabytes of data, but you get the same variables. And then you can see how the departments interact with each other. This here describes the process. So we filter email using, sometimes we just get it as a big database, or we can use our own client. Then we calculate those metrics, those 6 variables, and that allows us to measure how efficient, creative, performing, and so on our community is. The first thing is central leadership. When I started Coins, I thought, coming from Switzerland, I even thought even more so, egalitarian groups are good. It turns out that's perfectly fine, but you still want people taking the lead. However, they should change. It should not always be the same people. For creative tasks, if people are taking turns, and that means that you have patterns which, in the language of social network, oscillate between high betweenness and low betweenness, then that's good. So the next one is not just fast communication, but bursty communication, because if you have just fast communication and the virtual mirroring works only too well. If I tell people how they are being measured, they'd start behaving like that. But for fast communication, that would kill you. If you wanted to be the superstar, you would have to answer your email all the time. And so bursts of email, that's what we are looking. Contribution, that's another thing. And honest sentiment is yet another thing, where we measure basically emotionality and word usage. But let me just come to the end by showing the wiki history applet, which is quite different. We basically have taken Wikipedia, and this is available online, to construct this network of people through time. And so here you see the 3 Roman emperors living in the same time, and that's how they get the network, the links. And then we have people before and after, and they are not taken into the network because they couldn't have had a chance to know each other. So there was definitely no social tie between Pyrrhus, Syncellus, and another historian called Pisani. And that thing, just to show you here. So here we have, it's a little bit, it doesn't look too pretty because the resolution is relatively low. But now here, I could now zoom in. This is year 0, but I could just go to any other year. And this is all linked on my blog and my website. And so here we would see that Augustus seems to be the most important person in year 0. And so we could now jump there. And so I think with that, I have used up my last minute, so thank you very much.